In this video tutorial, I'll explore frame-by-frame animation in Photoshop to export to animated GIF. I'll do that in service of this project, wherein I wanted to convert the assets that I made for a movie poster called Dirt into an ad for the web. And so I've selected a common ad size, 300 by 250, which is known as the medium rectangle or mid-page unit by the Interactive Advertising Bureau that sets the standard for these web ads. And this performs very well, this ad, outperforming other ad sizes as well as keeping file sizes down because it's a pretty small space in which to work. So I want to animate the elements of this to advertise this film. And so I've already imported the assets, and we'll get back to this to do that in just a minute. But first, let's explore frame-by-frame animation in Photoshop a little bit more generally. And in this case, I'm actually going to be working at another ad unit size, the billboard size, which is 970 by 250. But I just wanted to animate my name here. Let's get started with that. I'm going to go ahead and just type my name as a reference, and then I'm going to draw it. And so we'll explore just drawing and some frame-by-frame animation to make this work a little bit better. I'm just going to set the size of this to something a little bit bigger and reposition it. And basically, I just wanted a reference as to where to draw. And so I'll use this text as a reference, and I'll start to draw on top of that. I'll go ahead and create a frame on top for my animation, and then I'll begin drawing. And so let's go ahead and select our brush. I've already selected a size and style, the Kyle Ultimate Pencil Hard brush at about 30. And I can play with different sizes and colors, of course, but you can draw anything you want. I'm just going to animate some text in this particular case. So I'm going to draw on top of these, and what I do, it does not have to be perfect. I don't have to stay in the lines per se. Part of my idea here is that I want my name to sort of change across time. So I actually want it to look a little bit different frame to frame. And what I'm going to do is create a new layer for each frame of animation that I want. I can turn off the old layer after that, and then I'll redraw this. I think I'll actually shift the color space just a little bit as I go too. So I'll bring it more towards the blues as I sort of animate this. So every time I draw a new frame, I'm also going to change the color, and I'm going to just sort of redraw on top of this just for fun, and we'll see what this will look like once we're done with it. Again, I'll create a new frame, and maybe I just want about 4 different frames, and I'm going to shift the color a little bit. This time I'll go into the blue space. And you could certainly do more frames, and you could draw anything you want. Like I could sort of draw characters and all kinds of things if I really wanted to use Photoshop for some simple animation. Okay, and so lastly, I'm going to create a new layer for my last frame here, change the color up. I'm going to bring this more into the green, and then again draw my text. So sometimes I'll call this sort of layer-based animation in Photoshop, because what we're really doing is taking each frame that we want as part of our animation and putting it onto its own layer. So that's what it looks like by itself. And I've got all of these different layers sort of on top of each other, as you can see, but we've got this different sort of animation that would progress between each of these frames. Okay, so it's time to animate this stuff. Let's bring up our timeline. Under Window, you'll find your timeline here, and there's 2 options for creating animations inside of Photoshop. We can do frame animations, which I'm interested in talking about here, as well as create a video timeline, which I discuss in other tutorials. So what I want is to create the frame animation, so I'll just click on that option, and it will create a frame for my animation. Now, there's some different ways that I can populate this animation. Because I already have different layers here, one way that I could populate those layers to different frames would actually be to click on the little hamburger option menu button right here and just make each of my layers into frames. So make frames from layers is an option here. And when I choose that, you'll see that it actually creates a sequence. And it takes each layer that I have and puts it on its own frame. Now, I didn't need the Carl layer. I actually don't want that. So if you wanted to delete a frame, you could delete, and you'll see that that deletes the frame out. And then each of these is a different frame. But I wanted the black to be underneath each of the frames. So one of the things that I could do is take that background and say that I want that sort of visibility to be locked across all the frames. And it's called merging the layer visibility. Right now, when I go to a different frame, that layer's visibility eye gets turned off. So I want to have that maintained across all the frames, and one way that I could do that is to sort of unify it across the frames, and it says it's going to match it across all of the frames. You'll notice that now these other frames have that black background. I didn't need the blank version of this, so what I'll do is I'll actually delete that particular frame, and that one's gone. And now I could actually see my animation. I could click on the play button here to just see what it's going to look like as it animates between these frames. I could stop that. By the way, you can also just hit the space bar on your keyboard in order to see your animation play back. And so there's my name animating and flashing with color. Maybe I like it, maybe I don't. I could certainly edit that. I'm going to get rid of some of these frames just to show you some of the other ways that we could have worked. So when I delete this selected frames, I could get rid of them by clicking on the trash button to remove frames. And so I'll delete those frames. And I could have remade these instead of like converting my layers to frames. I could have just made each frame as I go. So I would do that simply by clicking on the plus to make a new frame. It duplicates what was in the old frame, but then you can change things, right? So what I really want is my next piece of animation, and I could turn this other one off. Or maybe I have one where there's a transition where they're both there, then I go ahead and create a new frame, and then I turn this other one off. So we're making a transition where they're both on at one time, and then we switch to the next one. Maybe that's kind of interesting. So then what I'll do is I'll create a new frame, I'll turn my other layer on, create a new frame, turn the other layer off, right? So I could turn on and off whatever layers I basically want as I progress through this animation. And that's what I'll do. It's layer-based animation. You can turn your layers on and off. I think I'll have one more where the background comes back, and then I'll end it right there, and it will kind of loop in this particular case. So if we play this back, you'll see that I'm getting all of this animation happening. Pretty fun. It's set, in this case, to loop forever. If I just wanted it to play once, I could say once right here. And in that case, when I hit play, it was just going to play through the timeline once. So you can choose kind of how many times it plays. I can choose other right here and say, oh, play 2 times. And so that would then animate through that twice. Okay, so we get a little sense of that animation. Pretty cool. Let's say I wanted to do a couple other things with this. Let's say I wanted to like animate my name, but I wanted that to go through a couple times, and then I wanted to just sort of fade out. Well, one thing I could do with this is duplicate any frames I had. So I'm actually going to select across this entire sequence of frames, hold down my Alt or Option key, and then duplicate those frames. So I'll do that, hold down the Alt or Option key, duplicate the frames, and it actually gives me a duplicate of all of those. And so this way, even if I'm just playing this once and not looping, you'll see that it will play through the timeline of that twice, because I've duplicated those frames. Okay, now I'm ending on this particular frame, and let's say what I wanted to do is, actually I'm going to come back to my beginning frame. I'm going to go ahead and have one more frame that just has this sort of original drawing. Then I'm going to have another frame where I fade out that drawing. So I'm going to take it right here and like take the opacity all the way down to 0, where this is going to fade to black. And so if I wanted to animate that, I could do it myself and say, okay, it's going to fade to black, and let's say it goes to 80% opacity, and then create another frame, and then it goes to 60% opacity, and then another frame 40%. But it's a lot of work for me to do that. If I know that I wanted it to fade out, I could actually speed up this process. I'm going to go ahead and get rid of those 2 frames, and instead I'll have one frame after this one where I take that layer and take its opacity all the way to 0, and that's going to fade it out. And then I wanted to have a transition between these two, and we can allow Photoshop to make that transition. It's called adding a tween. And so that's the button that's right here, tween animation frames. And when I click on that button, we'll get this little toggle that comes up that allows us to define how many frames it's going to take to tween. And so let's say I wanted this to fade out in 5 frames. That's fine. I'm going to leave that. And then it says what parameters that are going to be changed between these. So I'm going to choose position, opacity, and effects, all of them. So any changes in any of those things would work. And I'm actually going to be tweening it with the next frame. So if I had chosen the last frame, I would have done it with the previous one, and it would give us our animation frames in between. So it's going to interpolate between the differences between these two frames and give me a transition, right? So you'll see that it's actually going to give me this transition where that particular layer slowly fades to black and fades out. And so if we were to play our animation, you'll see that it goes and then fades to black. Awesome. I'm ready to actually export out that animation, but we've explored the basics of this. If you actually wanted to export this out as a file, you can export it to animated GIF. I'll explore exporting to GIF animation as soon as I've completed my project here, which was to create an animated web ad. Let's get started with that. I've already imported my assets and have them in the layers here, and I'm going to turn off the typography because my idea here was to have this biker jump through the scene before the type appears. And I wanted the biker to kind of scale up and rotate through as it jumps. Let's get started with that animation. I'll start by creating a frame animation. If you're not seeing that, you might be seeing create video timeline. You can click on the down arrow to get the right choice of your timeline. If you're not seeing your timeline panel, it's under window timeline inside of Photoshop. So I'll start by creating my frame animation, which will create frame 1 over here, and then I can start to animate this. Now, if I was just moving the bike, that would be really easy. I could actually just start on one frame, create a subsequent frame, move the bike to where I want it, and then I could choose how many steps in between that I want those to animate between by clicking one time on this tween button and choosing how many frames in between. And you'll notice that the parameters here include things like the position, opacity, and effects. Those are all animatable but also tweenable. One thing that I don't see here is things like scale and rotation as options. And so when I actually make scale and rotation, we're gonna have to do that a little bit differently. This works great just with the movement part, but I'm not scaling the bike at this point. That's not what I want. So I'm going to go ahead and hold down Shift, delete these other animation frames, and start with the bike where I want it. But you'll notice something. If I add a subsequent frame, and then I hit Control T to edit, free transform the bike and scale the bike up, you'll notice that as soon as I hit enter, it's done that to frame 1 as well. That propagates across frames. So that's a change that will propagate across all of my frames. Not exactly what I want here. So you've got to be a little bit careful about things like scale and rotation and how that might affect other frames if you change that on a single animation frame. I'm going to hit Control Z, which will be our friend, to get rid of that. I'm going to get rid of this subsequent frame and try this in a different way. Instead of doing it like single frame at a time, I'm going to do multiple layers, and I can have each layer be different and only show one layer at a time. So what I'll do is I'll hit Control J multiple times. Control J, Control J, Control J, Control J, which is duplicating the layer. You can also just drag it down to the plus button in order to have a duplication, right? And so on this very last layer, I'm going to actually position this to be sort of this large version of the bike. So I'm going to go ahead and hit Control T, scale the bike up, constraining its proportions as I go, and kind of positioning it sort of where I wanted it as like the sort of scaled version of this. I'll put it right there for now. And then I'm going to have some different versions of this as we go. So I'm going to go ahead and select I might go the other way actually and start with my small version. I'm going to actually make the small version even smaller. So we want that one to be kind of smaller. I'll put it right here for now. I'm going to reposition these. Turn on the second one, make it a little bit larger. So the bike is going to get a bit bigger as it goes. It's a little maybe, so I want frame 1 and frame 2. We'll see that the bike is going to kind of get larger. Then I'm going to go over here to this other frame, scale it up again. And I'm just kind of positioning these a little bit too. Then this other one is going to start to scale up a little bit more. And we could see that the different scales could happen on different layers. So as I'm doing the scaling, we could think about like how this might happen on different layers. And so I'm trying to scale the bike up and up and up as we go. And finally, it's going to have this like really big version of it. So I'm not sure, maybe that last one was too much. I'm going to delete that last one and duplicate copy 5 the second time, making the scale just a little bit bigger of that. Okay, so I've got these subsequent frames that allow this to get bigger and bigger. Now what I'll do is simply turn all of these off, and I'll start the bike where I wanted it from, I need to be on the right layer here, but the first frame here is going to be the very first layer, and I'll have the biker sort of down here, and I also want to rotate it so that it's kind of rotating upward just a little bit as we go. So it's slightly off screen. Then I'll make a new frame. I'll turn off frame 1 and turn on frame 2. I also wanted this to be rotated a little bit. I'm going to hit Control T for it to rotate it, and then put it into the position that I wanted it to be. Hit Enter. That's great. I'll create a new frame. Go to frame 3, turn off frame 2, select frame 3, Control T to rotate and position, and kind of see where we're at as we go. And I could kind of go back and forth. We can kind of see 1, 2, 3, how that's animating. These are going pretty fast in terms of the animation. By the way, I can set the timing of these if I wanted, this is under no delay right now, but I could set some timing here. So if I decided to have 1 frame per second, I could choose that. 0.2 frames per second would be, that would give me 5 frames per second. So depending on how fast I choose this, I could change the speed of this. So if I wanted this, like, let's say 0.2 per second, I could change each of these to 0.2, and then they would hang out a little bit longer as they go. It would be more like but as it's jumping through. So I could change that timing. I'm going to go ahead and click to the next frame, and it always copies from the previous one. So once you set that timing, it will continue with that timing. And I'm going to turn on the very next frame of this, and we're going to get some of the rotation happening. I want to make sure I got the right layer, and then rotate that sort of back and kind of in the position that I want. If I like that, I'll hit Enter, go to my next frame, turn on the next layer, turn this layer off, and we'll allow this to start kind of rotating through. And I want the biker kind of in position here. So we see where I was and where I'm kind of going with the biker. I think I needed this one just a little bit rotated as well. Then I'll go to the next frame. But first I need to make my next frame, so click plus, then turn on my next layer, and I want to make sure that I position this biker where I want. And let's see where I was with this one and where that one is. Then I'll go to the next frame, plus to create my next frame, turn this layer off, turn my new layer on, and then make sure that I've got the right layer as I'm moving, and then sort of position this sort of where I wanted it to be as this biker kind of comes through the scene. Then I'll have maybe 1 more frame here, and simply now move that biker. And what I could do is kind of have it move sort of off and down, and then interpolate between those frames. So I'm going to go ahead right here and say, with the next frame, let's go ahead and add like maybe 3 frames across. and it's going to then sort of allow that to just move off the screen. There we go. All right, we could see what that looks like if I hit spacebar to play this back. There's our biker kind of rolling through the scene, scaling up. It's just going pretty slow. And so what I might want to do is take all of these frames, I'm going to select across them, and I'm going to change the timing on this. I'm going to say 0.1, and that changes the timing on all of the frames at once. And so I'll go ahead and see if that's a little bit faster, if I like that better. It's going in a little bit faster. Might feel a little bit slow as it goes through. I could also see what it would look like if I just said no delay in between these. And then what we could do is we could animate it through, and it's going to go kind of even faster again. So if I like that, I'll have that bike jump through. Pretty cool. Then once the bike is jumped through, I wanted to animate the text into place. And so I'm going to go ahead and create a subsequent frame for that, and then start on the text. And so I'll start with the title of the movie, Dirt, but I wanted to have that fade in. So what I can do here is have it on one layer, then click again to duplicate it to a different layer. I'm going to go back to this original layer and take the opacity of that down. And that is something that we could animate with interpolation. So what I'll do is I could take the opacity down, or I could choose like something different for the position. We could also animate some of the different sort of properties and effects of this. Let's go ahead and do a little tween here where I'll animate that opacity, and let's say it takes 5 frames for that to fade in. You'll see that as I do that, we'll have that particular thing fade in. So maybe I like that, or instead of that, if I don't like that, I could always get rid of these frames. I've got, let's see, 2 neutral frames there. So I'm going to go ahead and get rid of these additional ones. I can hit sort of not delete, because it would actually delete the layer content. I'm going to go ahead and hit the trash can to delete those additional frames. And then I'll have this frame have the title. And what I want to do with this title is take the opacity up, but have it, what we're going to do is we're going to have it start off screen. So the title is going to be on this frame, but it's going to be off screen right here. And so then we can animate that title in. The other thing we could do is think about that title's drop shadow content, because the drop shadow could have an effect here. So if we actually turn the drop shadow to a different amount, or maybe I turn it off right here, what we could do is move this. I'm going to have it move off screen, holding down shift so I don't sort of rotate it. Then we'll bring it in. I'm going to turn the drop shadow back off. So first I'll move it in, and then I'm going to do another duplicate frame here where I actually make the drop shadow appear. And what we could do is do some interpolation between each of these. And so now what I'll do is hit on the tween, and we'll have it animate in 5 frames. And then once it sort of hits this space where it's animated into place, but before the drop shadow goes in, then I'll animate the drop shadow in by hitting the tween. And those effects will also animate. So I'll have 5 frames of the drop shadow coming in. So in this particular case, what we could do, if we look at that, it's going to animate in, and then you'll see that the drop shadow animates in. Cool. As soon as that's done, I'm going to go ahead and add another frame, and what we'll do is we'll bring in the in theaters part. That part I might just fade up, so let's go ahead and do that. I'll have this version, then click plus for a second one, but on the one immediately behind it, which would be frame 24, I'll select that and just turn down the opacity of the in theaters. And then I want that to animate in. I'm going to have a tween to do the in between frames. And let's say I just add 4 frames in that particular case. And what it's going to do is allow that part to come in. Okay, everything is operating without a delay, but this very last frame, I might want to have that hang out a little bit longer. So that one I'm going to say is going to hang out for a full second before we get a repeat. Then what I'll do is I'll change this to sort of animate, let's say instead of forever or 3 times, I'm going to change that to other. It's not going to forever loop, but it's going to play twice through the animation timeline. I'll click OK to see what that looks like. And then we can go ahead and rewind and then hit play. And we should get the bike animate through and then the bike animate through again with a 1 second sort of freeze right there at the end. So I'm going to have that play through twice. If I'm satisfied with this animation, that's great. I'll be able to save and export this out for the web. The way that I'll do that is to save it. I'm going to go ahead and do a save as here and call this biker animation end. I already got one, but I'm going to replace that and replace that one. And with biker animation end, I want to export this out. So I'm going to say file export. And I could either export it out as video. If I wanted an MP4 file, I would say render to video, but I don't want this as video. I wanted it as an animated GIF. So to create that, I'm going to use the file export save for web feature. And once the save for web comes up, we want to make sure that GIF is our format here. So I'm going to choose GIF and we're going to make this an animated GIF. I can see the animation down here and we could play it. And we could see what that animation is actually going to look like as it plays through. So the bike actually feels a little faster in the animated GIF as that runs through. If I needed to adjust my timing, I could go ahead and do that back in the file, but I'm going to say that that's good. You can see that we also have looping options here. If I wanted this to just loop over and over again forever, I could choose that forever option, and then it would actually play this animation and just have it loop over and over again forever, basically. It would just keep looping, and that would be the animation. So maybe that's something I'd like, or if you didn't want to annoy users by having constant movement, you just want to attract their attention to the ad so that they see it initially, you could have it loop any number of times you want, and you'd be able to set that loop count. So right here, I can actually choose other and set whatever loop count I want, regardless of what I had put here. I had said 2 times here. If I want it 2 times, I could reset that here. That will be the default when I come here, but you could write over that in the export feature. So now all I have to do is hit save, and I could save this out as the animation that I wanted. I'm going to go ahead and save it, biker animation, and we'll go ahead and save that file, and then we can take a look at it inside of a web browser. So I'm in a web browser and I can simply hit Control O or File Open in order to open files. I'll find that biker animation and GIF that I just created, hit open, and you can take a look at what that actually looks like playing in a web browser, what the actual speed would be and what that looks like. So this is what the end user would end up seeing. So we see that that played through twice before it paused. I wanted to refresh it. I might have to hit Control refresh right here or Shift on the refresh button. Otherwise it might be a cached asset. So sometimes when you hit refresh, it won't refresh your animated GIF. You'll have to hit Shift refresh in order to clear the cache and then redo the graphic. And so we can see what that graphic looks like here. If I'm satisfied with that, I'm done. I've exported my animated GIF and I could share my file out with my developer or whoever was going to post that ad on the web for me. I hope you enjoyed this exploration of creating an animated content using Photoshop and doing frame by frame animation.